I don't think we need to build a new canon. Not because the traditional educational academic industry film canon isn't flawed. It is, but because a secondary film canon already exists. We don't need to build it. We just need to codify it. My first exposure to film theory wasn't in a classroom. It was in my phone, a small keypadded Nokia thing with half a camera and a fingernail screen. I would have been 10, maybe 11, based on the house which my memories are in. I had somehow found my way onto a website called TV Tropes. Now, if you know anything about the pop culture wiki, you know it's probably not the most reliable source for a framework of fictional analysis, but it's where I started, and it's where I got the itch that ended up with me in this course. If you read up on the history of literary theory, think of it as a massively collaborative work of radical formalist analysis. If that means nothing to you, don't worry, it's basically gibberish. But in English, the TV Tropes wiki aims to deconstruct every work of fiction into component tropes, and to describe as many of those tropes as possible. You can think of tropes as like tools and elements of a fictional work. They're anything from genre to story structure to character type. These tropes tend to have semi-serious or pun titles and often require about a paragraph of etymological justification. These might range from really broad tropes like the action girl or cool car, down to absurdly specific stuff like dystopian Oz or gratuitous Italian. The end goal almost seems to be for you to be able to immerse yourself in this wiki for so long that you come out the other side with this incredibly weird, detached view of fiction. Like looking in on stories as some kind of weird anthropologist or that fucking code scene in The Matrix. It didn't start out this way. At some point, this 300,000 page behemoth of a project was a fucking Buffy the Vampire Slayer wiki, and it just got out of hand. TV Tropes wasn't designed. It's a community, a resource, an idea of criticism that evolved from the piecemeal contributions of tens of thousands of writers. I contend that television tropes and related early pop culture forums form the basis for a culture of decentralized, democratized film study and analysis. That there already is a secondary academic informal pop canon, even if the work to collate it hasn't been done. This new vision is built on 7 words. There is no such thing as notability. See what I did there? Terrible joke. Wait, shit, that needs context, doesn't it? Okay, so notability is a concept on Wikipedia. The idea is that if something is unimportant, is trivial, has no significant coverage, it doesn't get a page. So, for example, you, me, your house, my house. Any stories we've ever written or films we've ever shot aren't notable enough for Wikipedia. The title is cribbed from where else but a TV Tropes page describing their general attitude to fiction. Since the work in this new canon is done by the volunteer work of tens of thousands, there's not really a point or a mechanism to say what should and should not be studied. This page acts not just as an internal policy, but in a more subdued sense, as a manifesto. There is no such thing as a work more worthy of study. There is no such thing as a work less worthy of study. There is no such thing as notability. Fuck. See? This is that paragraph of etymological justification I mentioned. Anyway, this theoretical framework isn't just limited to film. The aforementioned wiki has discussions about every medium you can think of and many that you can't. Everything from ad campaigns to oral traditions to pinball machines, because there is no such thing as notability. And this is a through line with the later trajectory of the canon. These analytical structures grew up around not just film, but literature, and, well, specifically around video games. For example, with TV Tropes, there are about 15,500 pages on film, about 13,000 on literature, and about 14,000 on video games. Films might be just barely more prominent, but the discussions are codependent. I'm going to cite some essayists talking about this phenomenon, but it's worth noting that a lot of those discussions were taking place in the original context of gaming criticism, even if I think they're relevant outside of that. Speaking of essayists, I think it's time we take the next step down the ladder of history, into the strange, dark world of YouTube. Wait, fuck. Just fucked up the lighting, didn't I? There we go. Now, around the same time I was digging into TV tropes, something very, very interesting was happening on a corner of the web that I didn't have the bandwidth to access. The modern video essay was being born. A lot of things had to align for this to happen. A free web video hosting site had to exist. Said website had to have lenient copyright enforcement. Filmmaking hardware and software had to become accessible to the average person. And a whole lot of film students had to become real fucking desperate for cash. So, thanks to lawsuits, technology, and the global financial crisis, a whole lot of people started getting into the video criticism game. And that is how a lot of it got started, as criticism, as complaining. It's no secret that the modern online media discussion space came out of what essentially amounts to bored millennials getting angry at games and movies they didn't like. But, slowly, something else started to trickle in. Little snippets of analysis and discussion. And then something crystallized. At some point in 2010, we saw the first video essay of the internet age. It's hard to say exactly what that is, though, for a number of reasons. And the biggest one is it's hard to say what a video essay is. The best definition I found is from a TEDx talk by the guy behind Nerdwriter. The definition he used was like, a video essay is pretty much the same as a written one. It can be as personal as a diary entry or as analytical as a high school assignment. It can be as long as a novel or as short as a paragraph. It's an incredibly broad category, which makes pinning down what the first one was kind of a fool's fucking errand. So, I don't know exactly what it was. It's possible that it was a pilot episode of a YouTube channel that would become Folding Ideas. It's possible that it was an early video by Anita Sarkeesian. It's possible that it was a curated selection of 6 essays published by the Virginia Commonwealth University's online quarterly Blackbird. It's possible it was all of them, independently. It's possible it was none of them. It's possible that the real first has been lost to time, like so much of the internet's history. But, honestly, though, it doesn't matter. This is a project, a genre, and those don't have commanders. In 2011, things took the fuck off. People started making channels to post video essays, other people started pivoting to them, some institutions tried to get in on this cool new thing. It was a lot, and it was the first big boom. From here though, I want to skip across the pond of history to the modern day, and divide what we have into a few really broad categories. So far, we've already established the early essayists. Stylistically, they are all over the shop, but generally they tend to use cheap, bad by modern standards equipment, make videos between 5 and 10 minutes in length. They tend to present themselves as shows, be fairly rough, and be in a aspect ratio. Later, around 2014, 15, 16, a wave of channels popped up inspired by every frame a painting. These were concise, polished, and even-toned. They generally tend to discuss one specific element of the construction of one specific work. They tend to use very even and non-emotive tones. They tend not to discuss the personal elements and their personal relationships to the work they study. They tend to use a lot of smooth jazz. And since then, it's kind of been a bit of a clusterfuck. In terms of style, variety has exploded. In terms of priority, runtime has exploded. In terms of content, it started to take a very interesting path. Unlike traditional academia, YouTube discourse is inextricably bonded to the personality that presents it. A video essay is usually written, shot, and edited by one person. There's no screening process, no academic standards, nothing to enforce the scholarly consensus lag time. What point would that have in a world with no such thing as notability? So, they excel in things very different from scholarly writing. Video essays and video essayists are experimental. Many mix elements of narrative, costume, and even musical numbers into their analysis. They're accessible, they have to be, to survive and gain traction in a public space. And they're personal. They can be immensely personal. There's this aim to discover and describe new perspectives. Every video essay has to have some new take. This is at its height right now, and this is why I wanted to describe the weird history of the genre's soul-searching. Because at this point, everyone in the game has figured it out. So, if we want to build a canon, we can look at the kind of films that get the most coverage and how they get it. The zeitgeist tends to focus on accessible, recent-ish films with a lot of cultural capital. Think less Hitchcock and more Spielberg. I say recent-ish because I'm not so much talking about films relative to last month's big hit as I am films relative to the traditional canon we've grown up with and spent the last few months discussing. Recent-ish means a focus on films that millennials and zoomers either grew up with in the home or could have seen in theaters. This this is a profoundly populist canon. One film that works well to demonstrate this is Shrek. For the start of what would become a fairly questionable animation studio, DreamWorks' debut was very well done and had a huge impact on a lot of people. More than a decade later, thanks to the nostalgia cycle and meme culture, it is one of the most well discussed films on the internet. To engage in this canon is to have one foot in the text and one in the discourse. If people are producing said discourse, it's because they're passionate about the original text and, unlike in more traditional works, aren't afraid to show it. This is a movement to find meaning and mastery in the mundane. While you could make a list and sort films by the quantity of their search results, I think that would miss the point. To codify this new style, we need a new way of treating the canon. A new era won't work with an old framework. So, I propose that we take a light attack. Dig through your memory. Pick out whichever blockbuster or Disney film you watched last. If you want to be a bit artsier, anything by A24. We are talking about Film Nerd YouTube. With the film fresh in your mind, find a video essay about it. Literally, just go to YouTube, plug in title video essay. Watch that. If you like the vibe of the channel, look at their back catalogue. If that doesn't work, repeat. Or pick something with an interesting title from the recommendations on the sidebar. YouTube employs a number of reinforcing AI systems, so if you find something you like, it's easy to find more stuff like that. Curate a dynamic canon that shifts with your interest. This style of canonization, not just in the selection of works, but in their presentation, destroys the vacuum that so many classic movies tend to exist in. It pairs its film with its discourse like a wine. It lets us question works outside the architecture of academia or journals. It lets us interrogate ideas in places we aren't usually taught to look. Isn't that why we want a canon? To root out meaning, advice, to learn what makes a good film tick, to play with the joy of analysis. It's vibrant, shifting, passionate in a way that industry voices tend to subdue. And, well, if you want to make a change, the gate is wide open. You don't need a thesis or a magazine or a platform to change the way thousands see a film. I guarantee there is a movie or an argument or an interpretation sitting in the folds of your grey matter right now. Some style or take or tack that no one has questioned yet. Sure, you might not have the social capital of a YouTube star, but that doesn't matter. There is no such thing as notability. The canon can't be static. It can't be isolated. You have to jump through so many hoops to watch that sight and sound list. There is mastery and meaning in the most mundane films. Sure, I'm sorry, this canon isn't a list. It's a guide, it's a process and a philosophy. It's my attempt to map out the path I've taken. I just hope it's a guide you'll be able to follow. A guide to a world where there is no such thing as notability.